Welcome to Habits of Hope podcast. I am Ginger Harrington, your host today. And today we have a really special conversation about processing emotions in healthy ways and with faith. To be honest with you, I had two other ideas for what we were going to do this week of Thanksgiving, and they just didn't fit. And I was just kind of scratching my head. The timing was coming close to publish this episode, and I didn't want to not have something, right? So anyway, I was chatting with a friend of mine. I said, the only other one that I have that I could put in this place is on processing emotions. And who wants to talk about that when you're getting ready for Thanksgiving, when you're getting ready to have a great time with family and friends? And this wise friend looked at me and she said, Ginger, sometimes there are very triggering things that happen when families come together. And sometimes there are a wide range of emotions, some good and some hard. She said, I can't think of a better time to do an episode on processing your emotions. They don't have to be 100% perfect. Sometimes there's going to be stressful moments. So anyway, I wanted to preface this conversation and just let you know what's coming up. And there's going to be some great information here that's helpful at any time of the year because our emotions are in play every single day. But if you are experiencing some stress about upcoming celebrations with family and friends, and maybe there's some difficult personalities in your family or just some rocky moments sometimes when your family comes together, I think that you will really enjoy this episode. And if that's the case, be sure to touch base with us on social media or on the website at gingerharrington.com and let me know. So without further ado, here's the start of the episode. Welcome, friends, to today's episode of Habits of Hope, and a warm welcome to my co-host, Larissa. How you doing today, friend?
Hey, sis, I'm doing great.
Well, today's episode, we've got a lot to unpack today. Friends, have you ever said something like this? I just don't feel like God is with me right now. Or have you ever been in a spiral of challenging, hard emotions that feel overwhelming? And one experience or problem seems to stockpile on top of another. And all of a sudden, you just feel like your strength is running out and your hope feels far away. Friends, if you've ever experienced that, or even if you're experiencing it right now, this episode is for you. Today, we're going to be talking about Lamentations 3. We touched on this in our initial episode when we talked about why habits of hope are important. And today, we are going to unpack this habit of hope. Experience your emotions, but don't let them rob you of hope. Larissa, emotions can be challenging, can't they?
They absolutely can. And it's okay to have them, as we're going to talk about, right? We can have emotions and we don't want to let them rob us of our hope. So I'm glad that we get to talk about this today.
Yeah. So I want to just jump into our scripture. This is written by the prophet Jeremiah, and he's in a tough spot. He's experiencing very hard things. The nation of Israel is experiencing hard things. His work life isn't going well. There's just all kinds of things. And in Lamentations 3, he's just letting it fly. He is just talking about all the things that have gone wrong and, feeling like God has abandoned him and that he is just in a terrible situation. And so we can really, I think, relate to a problem that is so overwhelming that you feel like you're losing your hope. And yet I love in this passage that Jeremiah gives us some real keys to hanging on to hope when our emotions are hard, when they last a long time, when the situation seems dire and difficult. Not necessarily a fun subject to talk about, but such an important one, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Very important.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with verse 14. And Jeremiah writes, I've become a laughing stock to all my people. Their mocking song all day. He has filled me with bitterness. He has made me drunk with wormwood. Are we having fun yet, friends? And he has broken my teeth with gravel. He has made me cower in the dust. Now he's talking about his relationship with God, his experience, and recognizing that God's allowed him to be in a hard situation. And no matter how we slice this one, friends, that's a hard place to be. And it prompts us to struggle with our faith sometimes, hanging on to hope when you feel like life is so bad that you're chewing on gravel. That's a tough thing. And if you've experienced that, I know that you have also experienced that challenge to hold fast to your faith and to hang on to hope when times are hard. So he continues and he says, and my soul has been rejected from peace. Well, isn't that a nice way to say it? He's experiencing depression, hopelessness, like extreme stress. My soul has been rejected from peace. I have forgotten happiness. So this tells us he's been feeling this way for a while. This is not just something that started yesterday. He's like even forgotten what it felt like to be happy. And if you've ever struggled with anxiety, maybe you can relate to this. I can't remember what it was like to feel happy or to feel good. And all of this is just giving us a living color picture of a time in Jeremiah's life and a time in the life of Israel where they were in a prolonged difficult situation where the emotions were just off the charts. So he says, I've forgotten happiness. So I say my strength is perished and so has my hope from the Lord. And that's a very honest admission. So we were going to talk about that a little bit. And he says, remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and the bitterness. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. This I recall to mind. Therefore, I have hope. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease. This is where we get into that familiar passage that we did talk about in our initial episode and that so many of us know. This is one that's on graphics and T-shirts and notebooks and a wall. Yes. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease. Praise God, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. But hang on. So oftentimes we stop right there because that's such a great place to stop. But wait, there's more. There's more. And he says, the Lord is my portion, says my soul. He's talking to his soul. Therefore, I have hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord. And so we're just going to talk about what's happening here and how we can learn some habits of hope from Jeremiah that can help us process our difficult emotions, our hard times, and keep that habit of hanging on to hope. So friend, share with me some initial thoughts. What's something that's jumping out to you on this aspect of our topic today?
I love Jeremiah's honesty. And I feel like we're not always honest with ourselves or the Lord or others, even if we fully trust them. And he's not shying away from lamenting and also speaking to himself, encouraging himself in the Lord and reminding himself of the goodness of God and that his mercies are new. And so I love his honesty in the season that I am in. Honesty from others has just been such a great gem that I did not realize was so important. So I'm excited to unpack this because Jeremiah hits us hard and there is so much hope in what he is saying.
Absolutely. And we can be encouraged by that example. And I love the honesty of the scriptures. It's not all puppy dogs and roses and pretty flowers and things like that. God addresses the whole of the human experience, the whole of our emotions and our emotional struggles and how they play out are part of our process of a deeper life with God, of a life of hope and trusting in his faithfulness. Because if we don't process our emotions, we can't go deep with the Lord, and we're not going to know ourselves well. We're not going to be able to deal with what's really going on. There's a book that's called The Thing Beneath the Thing. Like,
Ooh.
we can't get below the surface of the symptoms of our emotions, the experience of our emotions, to where God can do some healing, some growing, some stretching, some strengthening. The work of God happens beneath the surface. And that's why we need to cultivate a deeper relationship with God and a more honest relationship with God. I don't know if you've ever struggled with feeling like you got to clean yourself up before you talk to God, before you have that one-on-one soul-stirring conversation with Lord. But Lord, I need to deal with this first and then we'll talk. Have you ever felt like that, friend?
I used to a long time ago, but I learned over probably the last decade that that is not necessary. And I just bring it directly to him because I feel like I don't have the capacity to try to hold it back. But I definitely had experienced it when I was younger in my faith.
And we've touched on processing emotions in some of the points in our other episodes. And that's because our emotions are so connected to how we see hope, whether or not we feel like we have hope, because we tend to equate hope as a feeling. But in reality, it's a choice, and it's putting our confidence in God's faithfulness. And the strength of hope lies in God, not in how we're feeling, whether or not we feel like we have hope, whether or not we feel like we see an end in sight to our problems or a solution to the fix and all of that. So making time to process your emotions with God, and that being willing to be honest. I think about scriptures where David is saying, search me and know me and try my heart, because so oftentimes we don't know or understand fully what's going on inside. And we need the revelation, the discernment of the Lord sometimes to see what we're really thinking and feeling. These kinds of things, they can come as impressions of self-awareness in the moment. It's not like you have to stop everything to process an emotion, but giving it your attention, giving it your thought, and addressing that process of recognizing and addressing an emotion. And then when you can, take some time with the Lord so that you can get his perspective on it is so important. So what's one of the ways that you make time to process your emotions with the Lord?
I have started making that a practice, that I do that when I can in the moment, and at least make a mental note of it, knowing that emotions are okay and we need to process them. So I definitely stop and do that. And I'll make notes. We can't remember everything, right? We may remember the big emotion, but we can't always remember what comes after that, or maybe what the Lord has said. And so I try to make a note, even if it's one word, and then I make it a part of some time of the rest of my day or the next day to come back and process it. I'm very intentional about that.
One of the things that I am learning is, when I can, to bring that emotion to the Lord when I have time, either on a walk or just in a few minutes of silence, in a quiet time, invite the Lord into it and say, okay, Lord, let's unpack this. Make time to recognize what's happening and to have that experience with the Lord. And so oftentimes there's like a flow to it. There is a process. And here I think some of our points are going to kind of weave back and forth, because emotions are messy. They don't go in a straight line. And so processing our emotions doesn't necessarily go in a straight line either. But if we don't make time to process our emotions, they're not going to get processed, but they're not going to go away either. And so a lot of times we end up stuffing them, burying them, denying them, discounting them, shaming them, lecturing ourselves. I shouldn't feel that way. It's wrong to feel this way. And then they come out. Some people are exploders, and it just, when it comes out, it erupts and spills all over whoever is close by.
Yeah.
And then others, I know that's not fun to be on the giving or the receiving end of emotions that just erupt and spew. But then there's people like me. I'm a stuffer, and I'll stuff it and stuff it and stuff it, but it's going to come out in other ways. And God has a better way. But if we don't make time, if we don't stop and deal with what needs to be dealt with, we're going to keep floundering in the overwhelm. That's just something that I think is so important. Let's talk about another thing that we want to unpack with this is naming what we're feeling.
Yeah.
Calling it what it is. I think that we have a tendency to be so focused on getting things done and putting a good face on it. Think about you're out and about and you see a friend. How are you? Fine. And you're not fine.
Yeah.
But you don't want to get into it. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want people to know that you're not fine. And so we just say, yeah, I'm great. Yeah. How are you? Move on. And that's not healthy either. Not that we need to bare our souls to every person we interact with.
Right. We have to be selective.
Yes. Yeah. But it's easy to fall into an unhealthy pattern of not naming our emotions, not recognizing, oh, I am feeling sad. I am feeling angry. I am feeling, Lord, wow. Okay, Lord, I'm actually feeling very resentful right now. I think we need to talk about this. Will you help me understand this? Will you help me process this? Why am I feeling resentful? And so being able to name the emotion takes it out of the dark. It takes it out of the space that's just wreaking havoc in the background. And it pulls it into the foreground and enables us to see it for what it is, be honest with ourselves and with God about it, invite the Lord into it, and ask him to help us process it in a way that brings us forward in faith, deeper with him, deeper understanding, deeper humility, deeper brokenness, so that he can work. And part of that work is restoring our hope in difficult emotions. So can you think of an emotion, not necessarily the situation, but an emotion that you've experienced recently that kind of caught you by surprise and like, whoa, you really kind of needed to stop and go, I'm feeling this. And it's not always a bad emotion, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's good to, hey, wow, I'm feeling joyful right now. I love that. So what about you?
Yeah, I have two examples and I'll keep them really, really short. One, I woke up with a negative thought just recently. And I want to be even careful, negative thought, a thought. And I was like, wow, why is that coming back? Like nothing happened yesterday. Why did that pop into my mind? And so I actually processed that and I'm still processing it. But on the flip side, as you brought up recently, I feel like I had a shift in my grief and in this season that I'm in. And it was a good one. And it was an opportunity to go, wow, I'm growing in this area. And I do feel like there is more hope in a couple different situations. So I love that we're talking about this also because I believe as we talk about it and as we have cultivated in our own personal lives, hopefully our listeners will realize too that this will become a habit. And that's the great thing about habits is then it can become a default and we will get better at it. It will still be messy, but we will get better at acknowledging, like going, I have this feeling, name it. And then what do we do with it? So the first 2 points have really helped with that for sure.
Right. And since we're talking about making time to experience, name, start to process and understand your emotions, I just want to point out the obvious here that one of the ways that you are doing that is to commit to working with a Christian, experienced, intuitive, biblical counselor during your grief process. It's a commitment of time, of energy, of finances to do that. When we need to do that, it's very important to do that. And particularly when we're in prolonged seasons of extreme difficulty, trauma, grief, betrayal, things like that, we often do need someone with flesh on them and experience and wisdom who is experienced in guiding and helping people to process those emotions with God. Sometimes we don't need to go it alone with the Lord and stay isolated in our own little boxes. And I think it's important to recognize when counseling or therapy of some kind is needed, because this is an area where we do step into that sometimes.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up, because I think one of the things I've discovered, and others I think will as well, though I went to her in regards to my grief, in regards to Bill dying in 2020, my late husband, other things come up in those sessions. And she has helped me process those things as well, because there were challenges before that, and some I was aware of and some not. So that's the great thing about therapy and processing things, is it's not always just about the one reason that you go. And so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Right, because so oftentimes it's connected. Our emotions are connected to things deeper in our lives. And so oftentimes when we're experiencing an emotion, there is a connection that's trailing back to a belief or an experience, a pattern that we experienced earlier in our life. And the current situation brings some of that stuff back up. Oftentimes we don't recognize that that is in play. It's so easy to try to self-edit our emotions and try to fix them up, like I should make this look prettier. And until we have experienced them, until we have given ourselves time and space to get them out, to recognize them, to invite the Lord into them and begin to process them, they are going to be messy. And there's going to be things that hold us back in our emotional health, our spiritual wellness, our level of faith, our ability to have peace, that are really dependent on taking that time to experience our emotions and do the things that Jeremiah is doing that'll help him hang on to hope. And we're going to unpack those. So let's keep moving, because we got a long way to go, and we want to stay timely in our broadcast today. So the next point is ask questions. Be curious about your emotions. Lord, why am I feeling this way? What does he want for you to understand about your emotion or your situation, your problem? What is he revealing? So those questions can be so powerful. And we could actually call that another habit of hope, is being curious about your emotions, asking questions of the Lord. Why am I feeling this way? What is this really about, Lord? Because we know that emotions are messengers.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
They are responders. They respond to something that's happening, and they send us a message about what we believe to be true in the moment. And sometimes those things that we believe to be true don't line up with God's character or our nature as children of God. Sometimes they're embedded and attached to beliefs that we developed growing up. And so let's talk about that for a second. Do you have a belief from your past that's attached to emotion that is not true about you, but it feels true sometimes?
Yes, I definitely do. And this is something that I have been processing through with my therapist, something that was said to me years and years and years ago by a family member. And I have carried it and still struggle with it a little bit, a whole lot less now, because I've been processing it and reminding myself of God's truth. And sometimes I just have to stop in that moment and remind myself, hey, this is not true. They spoke it, and they spoke it out of anger, and they had a history that caused them to do that. And I can break that chain because of God in and through me. And so there's a lot of freedom in that. And because we're talking about messy emotions, it's still going to be messy. It still might come up every once in a while. And it doesn't mean I'm failing, which is such a great reminder as well.
Right. And those old messages, those old beliefs that come from childhood oftentimes can be so strong and so powerful in our lives, particularly when we don't recognize that that's what's happening. I struggled with was feeling like a disappointment. Am I a disappointment? No. But when I feel like I've let someone down, my emotions go back to that old belief that I'm a disappointment. And so that's why it's important to recognize the messages in our emotions so that we can tease out what's false and what's true and deal with what's there in the light and the care and the keeping of Jesus. So, what do I believe to be true right now? That's such a powerful question in experiencing our emotions. And so let's go on to the next point. Ask God to help you recognize how you are coping with your feelings. Our emotions, our responses that often trigger ingrained patterns in our flesh and beliefs that we hold that are tied to painful experiences. Being able to connect our feelings and beliefs and reactions gives us the opportunity to choose a different response. And so, I don't know that everybody's familiar with the term flesh patterns. So I want to unpack that for just a second. Flesh is living life independently from God, depending on our own resources, our own strength, our own ability to solve problems, our own patterns and strategies to solve problems and be successful in life, to meet our needs, to be loved, accepted, valued, and to have worth. When we are meeting those needs in our own ways, we're not depending on the Lord. We're choosing independence during that time. And that can lead to some flesh patterns. For me, growing up, sometimes there was a lot of discord in our household and a lot of fighting between siblings, and I wasn't comfortable with anger. And so I would go in my room and shut the door, and I loved Little House on the Prairie books. I would lose myself in the world of fiction and story and totally ignore what was happening. That was a flesh pattern that I learned as a child to escape from, to ignore what's happening, what should be dealt with. And so, being able to unpack with the Lord and recognize when we are triggered in our emotions to believe something that's not true, default to those strategies that we've used to cope with challenges. Sometimes we, want to treat ourselves with chocolate or extra dessert or what have you, when we're feeling upset or overwhelmed. Some people are emotional eaters and things like that. That's a flesh pattern of coping with emotions. I'm not saying don't do any of that, but recognize what's happening.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Yeah. So, what does that look like for you?
I am able to stop more. I was trying to think back when I was younger how I was dealing with it. It probably would be like binge watching TV. Definitely love to eat, but I love to eat no matter what the emotion is. But yeah, easy to fall back into those flesh patterns if I'm not mindful and careful. And then it adds to it by then feeling like a failure. I kind of referenced that a little bit ago, that we're not failing just because we have that same emotion keep coming up, or we have that thought, or we're thinking back to our childhood as we're still healing. Like, I know that I am still healing and in process, especially specifically to grief. So just being aware of my flesh patterns, I love that point of just being aware and calling it what it is, and then making a more mindful decision. How am I going to deal with it?
Yeah, yeah. And it's just that shift of our attention and that prayer in the moment. Lord, help me to respond to this emotion in your spirit. Help me not to default to a flesh pattern. Help me not to try to control the situation. Help me not to default to shaming myself.
Yeah.
I do that one. I lecture myself. I shoulda, woulda, coulda myself.
Yes, me too. Me too, girl.
And, that one, it's not helpful. It's not productive. It's not healthy. And it's not depending on the Lord and his grace and kindness and mercy that is available for us every morning, to refer to that passage in Lamentations 3. So, do you want to take us into our next point?
Emotions and challenges bring opportunities to go deeper with God. And I love that because there was a time in my life where I wouldn't see this opportunity as a good one, but this is where we can seek God's perspective and be open to what he wants to show us. And again, not to like hammer the point of therapy, but it's where I'm learning and growing a lot and seeing these emotions and challenges as opportunities to address some things that have been a part of my life for many, many years before Bill died, and kind of come out when you're pushed, right? Or when you're stressed. And what I love then is the opportunity to grow and then heal from some of those things, which is key, because then it really affects our lives and people in our lives, our relationships. A decade ago in my marriage, when I learned to respond better, or maybe even not respond at all, I definitely had a knee-jerk kind of anger response because of my upbringing. So my husband would say something and not mean it that way, and I would, attack, throw fuel on the fire, and then of course, how did he respond? And it wasn't good. And so when I learned to see, opportunity to practice maybe being quiet, not adding fuel to the fire, the difference that it made in him, his response to me, and then the difference in our marriage. And wow, it made a huge difference in the best possible way. So I love this reminder of seeking God's perspective and then being open to what he wants to show us.
I think that it's easy to say, okay, well, if I ask God to show me something, it should be an immediate insight. And sometimes there is an insight that the Lord brings to mind in the moment. Sometimes it's a scripture verse that, you read, or a point in a book or something like that. But sometimes that wisdom comes over time.
Yes.
And it takes a little bit of time for the Lord to reveal that to you. And it can be a process versus a specific, immediate answer. And that's one of the things that's really challenging about this process. But it's also part of that process that enables us to keep walking in faith, keep choosing hope, keep choosing to trust God in the process. Because so oftentimes we want it fixed now.
Yes, we do.
And God is taking us through a process of growth and transformation. So let's finish it off with two more things. And that is that piece that we've referred to a little bit, but being very specific. Lord, what truth do I need to believe and affirm right now? Jeremiah did that. He forced himself to take his attention off of everything that was wrong and recall to mind intentionally the Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease. His compassions never failed. They're new every morning. The Lord is my portion. He's my provision. So he's reminding himself of what is true about God. And particularly in some of these embedded backstory in our lives that are hurtful messages that are so often part of the emotions that we're experiencing, it's so important to keep coming back to what is actually true, what God says is true about you, what is true about God, versus staying so focused on the emotions, so focused on the problem, and looking at ourselves and looking at God from the problem. We got to turn it around and learn to look at the problems from God's perspective and from the perspective of truth and faith and hope. And doing it again and again and again builds this habit of hope, where even if we don't go there that first moment, we learn to catch ourselves. Like, oh, I'm spiraling. My emotions are really spiraling. I need to stop. I need to give my attention to God. I need to make time to process. I need to unpack this with the Lord. What is this really about, Lord? What am I believing right now? What is really true right now? What truth do I need to hold on to? And we keep coming back to it again and again and again, as many times as we need to. And in that process, the Lord strengthens our faith. He strengthens our hope. And I love it. The Jeremiah says, therefore I have hope, because of who God is, not because there's the problem is going to be resolved in the next 30 minutes.
Yeah. Good. So good.
In chapter 3 of Lamentations, he goes back into what he's feeling and the problems that he's experiencing. This morning I was reading in Psalm 31, and it was the same pattern of David, and it's called a prayer of complaint and praise. And it's just this pattern of expressing his emotions, making his complaints, asking his questions, throwing out his doubts, all the messy emotions, and then coming back to something that's true about God and praising him, affirming what's true about God. And then he'll give some more emotion. And it's the messy process versus a straight line. But that habit of hope is always coming back to affirm what's true about God and holding on to hope. So we don't want to allow our hard moments, our messy emotions to rob us of hope. And that's why this habit of hope is so, so important. Thoughts, friend? I know your mind is like,
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because that word messy is really resonating with me, because I feel like, the minute Bill got the second cancer diagnosis, everything became messy, and I didn't know it at the time. And we tend to run from the messy. And I was just thinking, as I was going over our notes and we were discussing this, is that we all struggle with messy. And why is that? Why do we struggle? And so my answer is, and maybe you have an answer too, is, we have not been taught to do messy well. And I'm talking about the church, we, the people of the church, right? The body of Christ individually have been not taught how to do messy. And then church, Big C church has not. And I know, like, for me, brought up by a parent that did not do messy, not emotionally or even like physically, practically, like in the home. And this is the thing that my therapist keeps reminding me. It's like, this is messy. There is nothing, like in regards to my grief specifically, there's nothing not messy about this. You didn't ask for this. You're never going to like this. You're never going to be okay with this. And yet this is your reality. So how do you walk that out? Because it's going to be messy either way. And so I love that we're having this discussion, because I think we all struggle with it, but we want to shove it underneath the carpet, clean it up, so it's not messy. So that's just something I'm going to continue to process with the Lord, is this concept of messy, and that it is okay because God is in the mess. And as you're saying, Jeremiah and David are in the mess, and God is in there with them, and there is still hope.
Yes, you said that so well, my friend. While you were talking, I pulled up Psalm 31. And one of the things that is an example of this that we're talking about is David in Psalm 31:14. After going on and on about how awful things are and how terrible he feels in situations that he's in, and he says, "But as for me, I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from those who persecute me. Make your face to shine upon your servant. Save me in your faithfulness, Lord." And so that is part of that process of lament, expressing the emotions, being real and brutally honest about what's happening, but inviting the Lord into it, processing it with the Lord, and then making that habit of hope to hold fast to what is true about God and to put your faith and your hope in God. And if you need to go back through the emotional loop, you'll go through the emotional loop again, but keep closing the loop with that affirmation, holding fast to what God says is true, what is true about him. Jeremiah said that I recall to my mind, and therefore I have hope. There is power and hope in the truths about God's faithfulness. And we can take that one to the bank every single day of the week. My goodness. Do you want to close us out with anything that you haven't said yet about a practical application piece? Because we've kind of woven the application piece into the talking points this time versus unpacking them separately at the end. But I just want to give you space if there's something that you thought of to apply some of this that we haven't talked about?
Two last things. One, being able to process with a trusted friend, and this might be something we're going to have to unpack at another time. And I like highlighted the word trusted. So like I know with you, I can process things with you because we have been friends for a very long time. So when I say trusted friend, it's someone you've known for a very long time who knows you and who is steeped in the word. And I know that you are steeped in the word because I see it lived out in your life. And what I do when I'm processing with God, processing with you, processing with a therapist is I take really good notes. And when I say that, that doesn't mean you have to be a great note taker. Write this stuff down. Literally in my therapist's office, I am typing like a mad woman on my iPad, and I do it when you and I are talking. And when I'm journaling with the Lord, I do it on an iPad because it's quicker and I can write that stuff down. And then I go back and revisit it. And I think that's where people, they A, don't take notes, and B, then they don't go back to revisit it to then process more. When we say take notes, we're not saying you're writing a novel. You are just bullet points, being brutal, throwing up on paper, for lack of a better word. And it has really helped me. It's made a huge difference in my life.
Right. I love that. And another thing that we want to make sure that we capture and remember are those insights that the Lord gives us, those truths about his care and compassion, his mercy, his loving kindness, his presence with us. And, just to go back to Psalm 31 for just a second, a little bit later, David, he says, in verse 21, blessed be the Lord, for he has shown me his marvelous faithfulness in a besieged city. That's a problem that's for the long haul. That's a long problem. And yet he's saying, the Lord has shown me his faithfulness. He's shown me his goodness in the midst of the heart. And when we have those glimpses of the truths of God, the presence of God, those moments of awareness that, yes, he is truly with me deeply in this, to note that, to remember it, to be thankful and grateful, and come back around and review the things, the insights that we learn when we go through our hard places with our hard emotions. That's one of the benefits of expressing them with the Lord, making that time to process and holding fast to hope is we learn, we grow. The Lord is transforming our character from glory to glory. And so oftentimes that happens from one challenge to the next challenge as we keep beholding Jesus in the moment, as we keep choosing hope in the moment. So friends, powerful habits of hope. I hope that these words have deeply encouraged you that one, it's okay to have hard emotions, and it's needed and necessary to make time to experience those emotions, to see them for what they are, how they're connected to maybe some unhealthy flesh patterns in your life, to recognize what you may be believing in the moment that's not true about you or your situation or about God, and holding fast to hope, not allowing hard times and hard emotions to rob us of hope. That's the whole point today. That's the habit of hope, friends. Let's do it. If today's episode has hit home for you and you would like to have more resources to help you with some of these things, I just want to mention real quick a couple of things that I've got at the ready for you that will be helpful. First of all, in my book, Holy in the Moment, Simple Ways to Love God and Enjoy Your Life, I have a chapter on moments to feel and a chapter on moments to think. And both of those chapters unpack processing our thoughts and emotions, discerning what we're believing in the moment, holding fast to truth. And there are lots of practical applications and truths in those chapters. So I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Check that out if this is something that resonates with you and you want to go deeper with it. On the freebie side, I have two freebies that are available at gingerharrington.com. One of them is the seed of the podcast, and it's a PDF, beautiful 40-page PDF with 6 habits of hope. And has journal pages, applications, and some processing exercises. It is gorgeous, friends. I'll put the link in the show notes. The other thing I have is an emotional health workbook that actually goes through some of the steps of processing your emotions with the Lord. Both of those are free at the moment, free in the Deeper Life collection for subscribers to my website. So come join me over at gingerharrington.com if this is something that you want more of. And friends, we're all about taking these habits of hope and really making them practical, accessible, so that we can work it into our lives as part of how we do life and do faith with the Lord. So thanks again for joining us today. Hope this was helpful. Hang on to hope, friends, and we'll see you next week.